Nice mic cover. Should be the mic cover, MYC cover. So anyway, it's a great pleasure to be here. I have not been to Portland since 2014, my calendar tells me, which seems like that's much too long a time to be away from such a lovely city. So I want to thank particularly Tom Hatsis and Ian, for organizing this conference and all the people that helped them do it. I know it was mostly, Eden and Tom spearheaded it, but many people collaborated, because you don't pull off something like this, with just a couple of people. So the haven is wonderful, this space is wonderful, if it's a little warm, but we can take that, just pretend you're in the Amazon. So tonight I have to tell you about this project that the McKenna Academy, this nonprofit I created in 2019, is mostly focused on these days, this Biognosis project. And it does have to do with the restoration and digitization of this herbarium in Iquitos, Peru, that I've been associated with almost 50 years, actually somewhat more than 50 years. I first went to Iquitos as a graduate student in 1981, and I met the person that's now the curator of the herbarium. He was also a student at that time, and we've collaborated over that period of time on many various projects. So Tom got it slightly wrong. I'm going to give the presentation first, and then we'll show the short documentary, which is the first one of what we hope is several, 6 to 8 short documentaries that are supposed to, the objective is to kind of create a snapshot of the contemporary state of indigenous communities and local communities in the area around Iquitos, in these villages, because like everyone else on the planet, they've been impacted by COVID and world events and climate change and globalization, and in the case of Iquitos, ayahuasca tourism on top of all that, and yet these communities manage to thrive. So in the face of all that, and their reliance on nature, which they've always had, if anything, is stronger, because they have to rely on what is locally available. So I'm going to show this presentation, if I can you all see it? Yeah. Can I see it? Sort of. Okay. I've always liked this quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. What is a weed? A plant whose virtues have yet to be discovered. And I think the point of that is that every organism on the planet, whether plant, animal, bacteria, fungus, or whatever, has its place in the ecosystem. And it may not have value in our perspective, from the economic perspective, that we tend to make judgments about things, but it has a place nonetheless in the ecosystem. It's part of the community of biospheric species. And it may not have an economic value that's immediately obvious, but you never know, because today's weed might be tomorrow's cure. And we've seen this again and again and again. And particularly, well, cannabis is a good idea. I mean, it used to be called weed, I guess it still is, as a sort of pejorative term that this is a worthless plant. Well, I think everyone here is aware of the value that cannabis has. And really, it's still being explored. There's still a lot that we can learn from cannabis in terms of the uses that it may be, or the benefit that it may have for our species. And this is really an expression of symbiosis. If you've heard my talks before, you know I like to talk about symbiosis a lot, which is a mutually beneficial relationship between different species, like plants and humans, or humans and fungi, or you get the idea. Well, today I want to talk a bit about discovery. So we think about science as an activity where you develop theories, you develop models of the way things work, the way you think phenomena work, and then you construct hypotheses around that. And then you try to find, does that fit the available data? Does it adequately fit the data? Are there gaps in the hypothesis? What are the inadequacies of the hypothesis? And that's really how science advances. But another aspect of science that's not talked about so much, but in some ways, in my opinion, is the nobler side of science, because it's curiosity driven. It's the drive to discover. It's the drive to understand our cosmos and our place in the cosmos. It's not about manipulating experimentally, it's simply about exploration. Turning our eyes and ears to the furthest edges of the universe. We've devised technologies for doing that, such as the Space Telescope here. We've devised technologies to exploring the deepest depths of the ocean, to exploring the most fundamental levels of organization of matter. We've devised, and obviously psychedelics have a role here, we've devised tools to explore the unexplored continents of the mind, the unexplored consciousness of consciousness. And all of this is driven by simply curiosity, which is a wonderful human emotion, the desire to expand our sphere of understanding. So I think that's science in the best sense. That's what science should be, trying to expand our knowledge. And there are several processes to this. We explore, first of all. We just look, what's out there, or what's in there, or what's down there, what's in the world, this marvelous world that we're living in. We explore, we look for what's interesting, and then we observe, often in a fairly systematic way, and we use the instruments like our telescopes, our microscopes, many of the extensions of our senses to increase the richness of that apprehension, and then we describe them, often in great detail. This is another function of science. You document your discoveries. You often collect specimens, you collect pieces of your discoveries. You bring those back essentially as a voucher. The term voucher is a sort of a testimony that yes, we looked at this object, this animal, this plant, whatever, and we collected it. And then you document everything you know about it. And you develop a body of knowledge about a particular thing. And then in an equally important function of science, you have to disseminate this. And you have to do that in a very systematic way. It's not enough just to accumulate the knowledge if it's not shared with anyone. So then that's what science does. It publishes papers and organizes conferences and research seminars and documentaries and various ways to share with the world, both other scientists and so-called laymen, whatever that is, the discoveries, the fruits of scientific discovery. And thus does knowledge advance. And we often collect some of these discoveries in great institutions of civilization, like museums and libraries. For the life sciences, botanical gardens and herbarium play an important role here. These are the treasures of civilization. We can get into the argument, the discussion and argument about, well, some of these things have been ripped off, some of these things have been co-opted by civilization. Yes, that's true, but that's another conversation. At least they have been noted and preserved and protected. So that is a function of these institutions that I think we can be proud of. And for example, the Royal Botanical Garden at Kew, or the New York Botanical Garden, or the Harold Lyon Arboretum in Honolulu, are just examples of world-class botanical gardens that are repository for living collections. We have botanical gardens, and then we have herbaria, which are much less known to many people, but herbaria are basically libraries of preserved specimens. Usually plants, but there are also fungal herbarium, like the Farlow Herbarium of Cryptogamic Botany at Harvard, or these two famous herbaria, the U.S. National Herbarium in Washington, the William and Linda Steer Herbarium at the New York Botanical Garden, one of the largest herbaria in the world, with about 5 million specimens. And these are libraries of preserved plants. Well, who cares? A bunch of dusty old dead plants. But the thing is, the record that they create, the specimens that are made from the herbarium are often called voucher specimens. And this is a typical example of a typical couple of herbarium voucher specimens from the collection in Iquitos. And on the left is Banisteriopsis caapi, also known as ayahuasca, one of the main admixtures in the brew, which is also called ayahuasca. And on the right is Psychotria viridis, or chacruna, the DMT-containing admixture plant. The combination of these two plants, as you people all know very well, is what produces the psychedelic component in ayahuasca. It's the DMT in Psychotria and chacruna that gives it its visionary qualities. These are specimens I collected when I was a graduate student in 1981 as part of my fieldwork. They're still there in the herbarium and actually in several other herbarium around the world, because the usual practice when you collect these specimens is you collect several duplicates, you distribute them to different herbaria around the world, just in case they're lost, and it does happen. Herbaria seem to be prone to burning down for some reason, and it's happened a number of times. Well, the herbarium that I'm concerned that I want to talk about is the herbarium of the Amazon. AMAZ is the official herbarium index designation, AMAZ. The Herbarium Amazonense at the University Nacional de la Amazonía Peruana in Iquitos, and its curator, Juan Ruiz. He is now the curator. When I first met him, we were both graduate students. And over a period of almost 50 years, we've worked together. And as he's evolved in his career, eventually he ended up as the curator of the herbarium. This is a remarkable botanist. He is the kind of person about whom it's sometimes said, when a medicine man dies, it's as though a library has burned down. Juan is that library. It's all in his head. He does not write anything down. It's all up here. And he has vast knowledge, over 50 years of research of the plants, the people, how they're used, the Amazonian bio. He is a well of wisdom, this man. And one of the main objectives of our project is to document what he knows. He's getting old. He's about to retire. It's important that we record what he knows as fast as we can, because he won't be around forever. He's almost as old as I am. And that's bloody old, let's face it. You know, so what Juan knows, it needs to be preserved. And we want to do that through videography mostly, and then also transcripts from that and writing down. But importantly, just to get him to tell his stories and talk about the plants that he knows. You know, this is a tremendous, he's a unique person. You know, he's not a curandero, he's not a healer in that sense. He's a scientist, but he has his foot in both worlds, a foot in traditional medicine from his family roots and the environment that he grew up in and was, you know, pursued his career in, and a foot in science. So he is the bridge that brings these disciplines together. This is him in the herbarium, and this is one of his helpers there on the right, Clara, one of his work study students. The herbarium is a gem, but it's a diamond in the rough. There are 150,000 collections, specimens in the herbarium. Only about 50,000 of them have ever been mounted and entered into the catalog, as you see on the right. These are all specimens that have been mounted and labeled and entered formally into the collection. Down in the basement, there are rooms and rooms full of boxes, like shown in the middle slide. These are collections that have never been unpacked. You know, some of them 30, 40 years ago, and they've never been unpacked because there's no room to put them. They've never been integrated into the herbarium. So one thing that we want to do is unpack those and get them cataloged, get them into the library before starting this digitization project. Well, we can start it, but this is going to be a longer-term part of it, because it's going to take, you know, basically an army of Peruvian work-study students to sort through these, and this is one reason we need to raise quite a few funds, so that they can just go through and mount these and record the information. This is all about information and the preservation of information, and bringing together this scientific knowledge with this traditional knowledge. The worldview of the people that live in these communities, that's another kind of great collection. This knowledge cannot be stored in an herbarium or a museum. This knowledge is living knowledge. It lives in the hearts and minds of the people and the memories of the people. This also is basically an oral tradition. This is unrecorded, and somehow it needs to be saved. So these collections tell the story of the plants and the people. This is where the people and the plants come together. These collections can be the bridge between the ancestral knowledge expressed in the stories, the songs, and the rituals of the people, and then the scientific record expressed in the collections and their collection data. So these voucher collections are invaluable because they are the bridge to this living culture. And in herbarium science these days, you've got me really paranoid. in herbarium science these days, you don't just make press specimens and store them in the library. You do that, but then you digitize them using high-resolution scanners and other techniques. So you make electronic versions of these things that then can be uploaded into the internet, and then anyone in the world can access them. So it makes them, you know, part of what they should be, which is the part of humanity's heritage, basically, humanity's knowledge base. There are some very famous digital herbarium, but most of them do. Like Biognosis is a list of the comprehensive list of digital herbarium. And for example, Australia's virtual herbarium, California Consortium of California Herbarium, the Missouri Botanical Garden, which is very big in Amazonian botany, the C.V. Starr Herbarium at the New York Botanical Garden, as I mentioned, Peabody Museum at Yale, and the virtual herbarium at the Peabody Museum at Yale, and there are others. And so we want to, the herbarium in Iquitos, this kind of neglected, underfunded, run down, but very valuable herbarium, we want to bring that online and turn it into a world-class resource for researchers in Amazonia.
Dennis, if you'd like to come back on stage. And just a real quick reminder, a question is a short statement with a question mark at the end of it. While we love testimonials and missionary statements and your interpretation of Leviticus is awesome, this is not the moment to do it though. This is just a Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you for that guidance, Tom.
Aeon will pass the mic. Oh, if you just raise your hand, Punk Rocky will get it to you.
I apologize, I have to share with you, I'm deaf as a post. And even though I have hearing aids, sometimes I can't hear you. That's why we've got the floating mic, and hopefully that'll help the situation.
Can you hear me okay?
So far, so good.
Perfect. First off, I want to say it's an absolute honor to meet you. You carry a very legendary name. I think a lot of us who have had a very spiritual awakening, you're the first thing that comes up, and I want to thank you for everything that you do. I do have a question though, as far as your work goes. Do you get a lot of resistance from people in power in the work that you do? And how do you combat that?
Do we get resistance from people in power?
Correct. So, like, the war on drugs here in the United States still has a very residual effect on the image of psychedelics and, medicinal plants that we're still trying to fight with today. In your studies, do you have people that are consistently trying to fight you on what you do?
Could you repeat that last part?
Do you have people, sorry, I gotta formulate the question then. Do you have people pushing resistance on your work in your study?
Not really. I mean, it's kind of the opposite. I think most people are receptive to this message. We all realize what's happening, on a planetary scale to the biosphere of the species in it and everything. And I think there is a consensus that we need to do what we can to preserve biodiversity, preserve this knowledge, and so on. The question is, what can you do? And there are many organizations and many people working on this. It's not like we're the only ones. What we've done is we've kind of adopted or focused on this really fairly small project, but it's concrete. It's something that we can do. There's a need to preserve these specimens and the knowledge that goes with them. And so that's what we're doing. And in the end of the day, it's probably a fairly small project, but if there are enough of these around, then globally, we can start to preserve this knowledge. And there's no way to estimate how much it's worth. I mean, attempts have been made to actually quantify it in terms of dollars and cents. How much is the Amazon worth? Well, it's actually worth $328 billion. And which is facetious. Of course, it's worth more than that. There was an attempt made a few years ago. There was a paper that came out, published by the New York Botanical Garden, that was something like the value of undiscovered pharmaceuticals in the rainforest. Well, how do you place a value on something that's undiscovered? You don't know what's there. So must needs, this paper involved a lot of hand-waving. Estimates of the number of plants that have been investigated, how many assays can you apply, how you can do it. And they came up with this figure that the Amazon, that there were 328 blockbuster drugs waiting discovery in the Amazon, each one of which would be worth, $1 billion. And this was 1995 dollars. So now each one would be worth. But the thing is, yes, it's valuable. These things have monetary value, but the value goes much beyond that. And that's the thing. I mean, we're capitalists, and we tend to look at everything in terms of dollars and cents. You can't really put a dollar and cents value on the Amazon, and you don't know what it's really worth until it's gone, and so that's my answer, sort of, to your question. Thank you.
Hello, I'll try to form this into a question. I have a relationship, I'm aware of a company called Univera that has what they call a functional plant library. And years ago when I was involved, they talked about it's not just, this is the name of the plant, but this is what it does. My question would be, would you be interested, or are you working with other, companies or I guess wealthy individuals who would want to fund something and go in, because as I was watching that, it's like, my question in general is about how that's happening and whether you're, did that question have a question mark at the end? Do you understand what I'm asking? Should I ramble more?
Yeah, I'm sorry, again, I didn't totally hear. What's the gist of what you're saying? And yell, please.
Yeah, the gist of what I'm saying is, are you cultivating relationships? What is your approach in saving the example that we saw in the movie, which is, because I'm aware of a company that has something they call a functional plant library, and these are called herbariums, right? And so how do we save this herbarium? How are you working on that?
Well, how to do it, how to save it.
And or would you be interested in me telling you about the one thing I happen to know of? There's various companies in the world that...
What I suggest you do is go to the McKenna Academy website. There's a tab on that website called Biognosis that summarizes what the pieces of the project are, what needs to be brought together to make this happen. So that's a good place to start. And there is funding out there. I mean, we're talking to some people that have operations, in the Amazon that they've tapped into sources of funding like USAID and various UN agencies. So there's significant amounts of funding there. It's just that we're very small. We don't have the professional high profile that a lot of these institutions have. So we're going to approach it through alliances with the institutions. So that's it. I think to the degree I could understand your question. So what happened to the person with the mic? Is there another question?
Yes, hi. So I had a question about the time wave. No, I'm just kidding. You talk about this knowledge or this need to, gather this knowledge, and you obviously have a very scientific background, but I come from a social work background, and I'm sure many people here are interested in preserving this shamanic healing knowledge, but don't have, a scientific background. What's your advice for people who maybe have more community organizing strengths in terms of preserving this knowledge than the scientific aspect moving forward?
Well, I don't think you have to be a scientist to contribute to this at all. I mean, this is a good example of what you might call citizen science, simply collecting information. And in the simplest instantiation, the way you collect information is you talk to people. You can go out and you can do this at home. You can do it right here. You can do urban ethnobotany right in your backyard. Or make a practice of going to the local farmer's market on an ordinary weekend, and then pick out the weirdest looking people you can find there and ask them about what they know about plants, and you're likely to be amazed. So the knowledge is there, and these secrets are there, except they're not secret. My experience is that most indigenous people are not so concerned to protect and guard what they know. They're very generous about sharing their knowledge. Their concern is more like, we wish somebody cared, we wish somebody wanted to explore what we know. And in that sense, just to show a little interest, and if you go to a place where, farmers market's a good idea, or botanical gardens, or any place people are using plants is a good place to pursue this. So you don't have to be a professional ethnobotanist or anything like that. You just have to be a good listener, and if you want, keep notes, keep a record of it. You can accumulate knowledge that way. I mean, this is a whole collective effort. This involves everybody, and so scientific credentials are not required. In some sense, they're helpful, but they are not required to explore this information. What's required is just curiosity, like we were talking about at the beginning, curiosity. That person over there at the farmer's market, you know, who's obviously indigenous, where did they come from? You know, just to have that conversation, you can learn an incredible amount because everybody has a story to tell. And a lot of times their story is tied up with the plants that they have relationships to. So that's how it is. Science is not a requirement. Science is a part of this. Anyone else?
Yeah, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to meet the people in the film, and especially that 76-year-old smoking a cigarette, climbing a tree to sing to it man. And I want to know, do you get to hang out with them, and have you ever received like a treatment? Do you get to be related to these people? Because that would be so beautiful.
I can't hear you. Sorry.
Do you, can you hear me now? Almost? Do you get to hang out with the people that you filmed? And have you ever received a treatment from the older man that was blowing smoke over people?
Maybe someone could repeat it. I'm sorry.
Do you get to hang out with the older man from the video, the 76-year-old man? Have you ever sat with him in ceremony and received a plant medicine from him?
I'm sorry, my hearing aid isn't working. Well, that one's easy. No. No, the answer is I did not. I did not even meet that man. Someone else who was making the film met him. But I have sat with many people like that man. I mean, there are people, so I can't say I have sat with him. But there's people who are out there. They're in every community, you know. And this is why Juan Ruiz, the curator of the herbarium, is such a unique figure because he brings the scientific knowledge and the traditional knowledge together. And that's a rare combination, you know. So there was someone up front here that had a question.
I want to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can now.
Oh, great. Okay. Hi. Red, Liberty Mushrooms. I have notes. Oh, geez. Okay. I first want to just acknowledge 40 some odd years in the rainforest studying this. That's an amazing amount of time, and I respect that work. That's incredible. I also want to push back just a little bit because I was disturbed by some of the philosophy of what I heard, and I actually had to leave and not watch the film because some of it was a bit problematic. So just get ready, you're in Portland, a little bit of pushback. You said that there's a collective effort. There's a collective effort to preserve this knowledge, which I agree, that's so important. I would imagine that the immersive experience you speak of already exists in the forest. We don't need VR or AI to do that. We can do it in our own forests. That to me is a bit of a colonial mindset. So I wonder if you've already heard this from those companies that fund VR, AI. They don't want open source. They want to profit from whatever is in the Amazon. So this idea of they can do, they can use this for whatever purpose. The purpose generally of people that might, give you $10 million is to extract and exploit. So I'm mindful of our audience. I don't know if there's anyone here representing the community that you came from, Peru, South America in general, or any indigenous people of Oregon, but I'm wondering if there's a way to examine the knowledge, what was his name, Juan Ruiz, that he already has. How did he get there? And how could this project preserve the forest that he comes from? So as opposed to this gamification, which to me sounds like playing into the hands of the capitalists, I'm sure you've seen it in 40 years in the Amazon, that destroys the forest. versus what work would it take to preserve the forest where he could use this work to go take interns out into it. There's your immersive experience. So have you considered that alternative, and how would that inform your work from sort of an anti-colonial extractive lens?
Right, well, that was quite a that was quite a statement. I don't want people to think that, you know, creating this virtual interface in any way substitutes for actually going to the rainforest. But what it might do is give people an experience of the rainforest without actually having to go there. I mean, of course, it's not the same as actually being immersed in the rainforest. On the other hand, you know, one of the things that's impacting the rainforest, it's being loved too much, in a sense. Everyone wants to go there, and when people come from, you know, outside the culture, they bring, you know, their economy, their cultural biases, and everything. And, you know, tourism in some ways can be a harmful, you know, can have its harms on the rainforest. So the idea is not that the virtual it's just an interface. It's just a way of giving people the experience of exploring the data that's in the database in an interactive and entertaining way. I didn't want people, I used the term gamification, and that's maybe a bad term. I think what I meant was it's an interactive experience, and that can be of use to people. And I think we have to use all the tools that we have. You know, this is just one of the variety of tools that we have to increase people's understanding. And people who, you know, if we create this virtual rainforest and people, visionary rainforest, whatever we're calling it, and people have that experience, then that can be linked also to on the ground educational experiences, you know, and that's why we want to form alliances with institutions like botanical gardens and museums and so on that are able to provide this experience and educate people, but in a way that just, you know, that in some ways respects people's approach to these things and gives people an opportunity to, you know, to have these initially online, but then in reality, I guess if that's the term, experiences, you know. And it's just one more way to make people aware of what the knowledge base is, how it connects to science and these records. You know, the herbaria has many uses. You know, it can be used in many ways. It's not just for ethnobotany. Ethnobotany is important, but it can also be used for biogeography and climate change, the study of the way that species distribution has changed over time. All of these things are important for kind of, you know, looking in depth at the Amazonian bio, and the herbarium can be the scientific lens through which you can look at these things and understand the environment better, you know, and then integrate the indigenous knowledge too as much as possible, which isn't always easy to stuff into a box scientifically, but it's nonetheless important to record the people's perspectives on the use of the plants, the stories, the rituals, the myths they have about this. I mean, this is their worldview, you know, and there's great concern that this is being lost. For example, the disappearance of indigenous languages is a big problem. And every time one of these last elders who speak a language die off, that worldview dies with them. And it can never be recovered. So that's sort of the basic premise, is that this knowledge is being lost, and we can do a little bit. We can do what we can to try to preserve it. So,
Wrap up the Q&A. Thank you so much for all your questions.
Actually, She phrased it really well. I was coming here and somebody told me on the way, hey, I heard that these conferences were being protested by indigenous people because the white man is colonizing this medicine now. So I was going to ask you what you think about that. So thank you.
So, could you repeat that question again? Yeah.
So on my way here, somebody said that there was protests by indigenous people about these conferences because they think that white man is colonizing medicine now, Amazon medicine. So
Right.
my question is, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's happening. I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing new about this. You know, I mean, the West, the so-called civilized West, has been co-opting plants for 500 years, you know, at least since the so-called Columbian Exchange. This is what our civilization does, you know, this goes on. I think that we're beginning to become more aware of this colonization, colonialism, and so on, and that's the first step toward, you know, being more equitable toward indigenous people. I mean, we have, you know, corporations that develop plants into medicines do not usually build reciprocity into their business plans, but they should, you know, and indigenous people really need to have a big say in how these plants are used and what knowledge they choose to share, you know, with non-indigenous people. I think the trope that's invoked is prior informed consent. You know, if you're going to develop a plant for a particular medicine and it comes out of a cultural context, you should engage with the elders or the wisdom keepers of that culture and get prior informed consent. Explain what you want to do and get them to get on board. And if they say, no, we're not on board, then don't do it. You know, we have to respect knowledge, and we have to, you know, I mean, science has a habit, and and not a habit, but in a lot of ways, science's objective is to discover what isn't known. You know, so it's sort of, you know, we want to discover the secrets and reveal them to the world. But sometimes people don't want those secrets shared. And I think we should respect that. You know, we should respect it, don't do it, but we should also try to educate them to the possibility that what they know will disappear forever and no one will be able to appreciate it. It's a tricky area, you know, it's really tricky. It's fraught with ethical dilemmas, but we just have to proceed in the best spirit possible, you know, and try to put ourselves in see it from others' perspective. And I think that's the, you know, this isn't going to be happening, this is not going to be solved overnight, but we need to change our attitude. And I think that the proliferation of psychedelics outside indigenous context is part of that, you know, because it is waking people up to some of these issues, you know, and reorienting our understanding of our relationship to nature and that sort of thing. I mean, you know, like I said, we're all in the film, we're all indigenous to Earth, and we should start thinking of ourselves in that way. You know, we are Earthlings. We're all in this together. We're on this spaceship Earth, and the spaceship's crashing, people. So we need to do something about that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming out.